I never cared about being the perfect wife. I didn't wake up early to make coffee, I didn't greet my husband at the door with a kiss, and I definitely didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't just to keep a man happy. Once upon a time, Dan loved that about me. My independence, my sharp tongue, my refusal to play housewife. But after 10 years of marriage, he had apparently decided I was no longer enough. And to prove it, he was planning to throw me away like an old pair of shoes on my birthday, no less. I should have seen it coming. The warning signs were all there. The late-night work meetings that seemed to happen more often than not. The way he'd started keeping his phone face down on the table, slipping away to take calls in the other room. The new cologne, the gym membership he suddenly cared about. And then there was Christina, the blonde, wide-eyed new secretary who had accidentally called our home number 3 times in 1 week, each time with a different excuse. Still, I ignored it. I let it slide, telling myself that after a decade together, things naturally cooled down. That maybe I wasn't the easiest person to be married to, and Dan was just looking for something exciting. That didn't mean he was cheating. I told myself all of that, right up until I walked into my own birthday party and realized that my husband, the man who had promised me forever, couldn't even be bothered to show up for it. The bar was packed. Friends, coworkers, even my sister, Megan, were all there, drinking and laughing like it was the happiest night of the year. Golden balloons spelled out "Happy Birthday, Kara" over the main entrance. The bartender, Matt, **T me a wink as he poured my usual whiskey neat without me even having to ask. And yet, despite all of it, something felt off. I scanned the crowd, smiling and thanking people as I made my way deeper inside, but I didn't see Dan. I didn't see him anywhere. I leaned into Megan. "Where's my husband?" She frowned. "Last I saw, he went into the VIP lounge with Christina. Like, 20 minutes ago." Christina. I should have known. My stomach tightened, but I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. No need to cause a scene. Not yet. I downed my drink, set the glass on the bar with a sharp clink, and made my way toward the back hallway where the private lounges were. My heels echoed against the hardwood floor, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know exactly what I expected to find, but I knew it wouldn't be good. When I reached the VIP lounge, the door was slightly ajar. I could hear them inside, Dan's voice, low and confident, and Christina's giggle, sickly sweet like overripe fruit. I stopped just outside, my fingers brushing against the cool brass handle. "After the party, I'll serve Kara the divorce papers," Dan was saying. "It's all set up, the paperwork, the accounts. That prenup means she walks away with nothing." Christina giggled. "You're a genius, baby. Once she's out of the way, we can finally be together." My breath caught in my throat. Nothing. He planned to leave me with nothing. It wasn't just cheating. It wasn't just some midlife crisis affair that he'd come crawling back from, begging for forgiveness. No, Dan was cold, calculated. He had planned this. He had arranged for my entire life to be ripped away from me, making sure I had no claim to the house, the accounts, the business we had built together. And then he was going to celebrate by taking his barely legal secretary out for drinks while I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back. Rage bubbled up inside me, hot and sharp. I could have walked in right then and ended it. I could have thrown the door open, called him out in front of her, made a scene in the middle of my own damn birthday party. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and turned around. Dan thought he had me cornered. He thought he had won. He had no idea. I was about to ruin his entire life. By the time I made it back to the main bar, I had already started forming a plan. First, I needed information. If Dan had gone through the trouble of hiding money, I needed to find out where it had gone. That meant getting in touch with my cousin, Brian, a forensic financial analyst with a particular talent for digging up dirt on sleazy men. Second, I needed to play it smart. If Dan thought I suspected anything, he'd go into damage control mode. I couldn't afford that. No, I needed to keep playing the part of the clueless, loving wife for just a little longer. I pasted on my best party girl smile and grabbed another drink from Matt. Megan was still at the bar, watching me curiously. "You okay?" Of course. I lifted my glass and clinked it against hers. It's my birthday, isn't it? She studied me for a moment, then shrugged. If you say so. I smiled and took a sip of my drink, letting the burn of the whiskey ground me. Dan was going to get exactly what he deserved. And the best part? He would never see it coming. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I wanted to, but because my mind was already racing with possibilities. My instincts screamed at me to do something, anything, but I knew that if I wanted to win, I had to be smart. I had spent 10 years with Dan, and if there was one thing I knew for certain, it was that he was a man who liked to feel in control. That was how he had pulled this whole thing off right under my nose, because he thought he was always one step ahead of me. Well, he was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. By the time Dan finally dragged himself out of bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes like he hadn't spent the night plotting my downfall, I had already showered, made coffee, and was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone like it was just another morning. "Morning, babe," I said casually, sipping my coffee. "You were pretty drunk last night. Have fun." He hesitated for just a fraction of a second before plastering on his usual easygoing smile. "Yeah, it was a great party. You have a good time?" I forced myself to laugh, shaking my head like I didn't have a clue. "Are you kidding? I barely even saw you. Where'd you disappear to?" He yawned, stretching. "Oh, just had a couple drinks with the guys in the lounge. Nothing crazy." "Liar." I smiled sweetly. "Well, I hope you don't have too much of a hangover, because I was thinking we should do something fun today. Maybe brunch at that new place downtown?" If I had suggested brunch any other day, Dan would have shut it down immediately. He hated day dates, said they were a waste of time. But now, with guilt sitting fresh in his gut, he hesitated. Yeah, sure. That sounds good. Perfect. If I was going to pull this off, I needed to keep him comfortable. He needed to believe I suspected nothing. While he showered, I slipped into my office and grabbed my laptop. I didn't bother wasting time scrolling through Dan's emails or texts. I already knew he was too careful for that. Instead, I **TA message to my cousin Brian. "Me, I need your help. And I need you to be discreet." "Brian, that bad?" "Me, worse." Within an hour, Brian had everything he needed: Dan's full name, social security number, and the name of his company. "I'll get back to you," he texted. "Give me a few hours." Dan walked into the room just as I put my phone down. "Ready to go?" I turned to him with an easy smile. "Of course." We had brunch. I pretended to listen to his half-hearted stories about work. I even laughed at his stupid jokes, all while counting down the minutes until Brian got back to me. By the time we got home, Dan was completely at ease. He poured himself a drink and settled onto the couch like a man who had won. Meanwhile, I locked myself in the bedroom and checked my phone. "Brian, you're going to want to sit down for this." I didn't sit. I just gripped my phone tighter and typed back. "Me, tell me everything." Brian didn't hold back. Dan had been funneling money into shell companies for months, moving assets into accounts with names I didn't recognize. Even worse, he had already started the process of selling our house. The house I had decorated. The house I had spent years turning into a home. And then came the final blow. "Brian, he took money from your joint account and transferred it into an account under Christina's name." I had to read that line 3 times before it fully sank in. It wasn't just that Dan was cheating on me. It wasn't even that he was divorcing me. He was stealing from me. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. Fine. If Dan wanted to play dirty, so could I. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof, that he was not only planning to screw me over, but that he was doing it in a way that could ruin him. Because if there was one thing I knew about Dan, it was that he cared about his image. He wanted to be the guy who had it all. The successful businessman. The perfect husband. The one everyone envied. And I was going to take all of it from him. Me, Brian, how hard would it be to bug the house? Brian, depends. What are we working with? Me, a husband dumb enough to think he's smarter than me. Brian sent back a laughing emoji, followed by, "I'll get the equipment. Be ready." That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I curled up next to Dan on the couch. I rested my head on his shoulder, letting him wrap an arm around me like we were still in love. He kissed my forehead. I love you, you know. I closed my eyes, breathing in his cologne. I know, I lied. I woke up the next morning and did something I never thought I'd have the stomach for. I kissed my husband. It was light, just a soft press of my lips against his cheek as he groggily rolled over in bed. Something I hadn't done in years. Something he hadn't earned. But if I wanted this plan to work, I had to sell it. He blinked at me in surprise, rubbing his eyes. What's this for? I shrugged, forcing a sheepish smile. I don't know. Just feeling lucky to have you. That should have made him guilty. If he had even an ounce of a soul left, it would have made him hesitate. Instead, he smirked, pulled me closer, and ran his hand down my side like he still deserved to touch me. That's sweet, babe, he murmured. Let's just enjoy the time we have together. The irony almost made me laugh. Enjoy the time we have together? Oh, I intended to. After all, Dan's time as the smug, untouchable husband was running out. Step 1. Play dumb. If I wanted Dan to stay comfortable, I had to act like the same oblivious wife he thought I was. So, I played my part. I texted him cute messages during the day, something I hadn't done in years. I made him dinner that night, pouring his favorite whiskey and pretending to listen as he talked about his stressful workday. I even curled up against him while we watched TV, letting his arm drape around me like I didn't know he was already planning his exit. Meanwhile, Brian was working behind the scenes. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. Brian, house is bugged. 2 hidden cameras in the living room and kitchen. 1 voice recorder in the office. You're set. I wanted to kiss him instead. Now all I had to do was wait for Dan to dig his own grave. Step 2. Let him slip up. And it didn't take long. 3 nights later, I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, when Dan walked in, whistling. Whistling. Like a man who didn't have a damn care in the world. I watched him grab a beer from the fridge, pop the cap off, and take a long sip before leaning against the counter. How's my beautiful wife? He asked, still writing whatever had him in such a good mood. I plastered on my best clueless wife smile. Good. Just trying to find a new gym. He snorted. You? A gym? Since when? I laughed, rolling my eyes. Hey, a girl can try. He shook his head, taking another sip of his beer. Well, if you want something low maintenance, Christina's trainer has been helping her get in shape. You should check him out. My stomach twisted. Christina's trainer. The same Christina who was apparently worth burning our entire marriage to the ground for. I forced myself to keep my face neutral. Oh! What's he like? Super strict, but he gets results, Dan said easily. She looks amazing. You should see her in. He cut himself off. Bingo. I let my eyes widen, like I was just some innocent little wife who had no idea what he had almost let slip. In what? I asked sweetly. Dan chuckled, shaking his head. Nothing, babe. Just saying she's taking her health seriously. He turned away to grab his phone off the counter, but I already saw the way his ears had gone red. Guilty. I smiled into my coffee cup. That's right, you bastard. Keep talking. And he did. Over the next few days, the hidden voice recorder picked up everything. Him and Christina on the phone late at night, whispering about when everything is finalized. Him talking about how excited he was to be finally free of me. Him going over the exact ways he planned to screw me over in the divorce. She doesn't even suspect a thing. By the time the papers hit her desk, she'll have nothing left. I listened to that particular clip about 5 times before texting Brian. Me, how fast can we use this against him? Brian, Patience, cousin. Let him screw himself even harder. Fine. If patience was what I needed, I'd wait. But that didn't mean I couldn't have a little fun along the way. Step 3. Make him sweat. Now that I had proof, it was time to enjoy myself. So, I started making small, offhand comments. Nothing too obvious. Just enough to watch the flicker of unease flash across his face. Like the next time we had dinner together. I took a sip of my wine, tilting my head. You know, I was thinking about getting my own lawyer. Just to, update some things. Dan almost choked on a steak. Your own lawyer? For what? I shrugged, swirling the wine in my glass. Oh, nothing serious. Just thought it might be smart to protect myself, in case anything unexpected happens. He laughed, but it was forced. Babe, what could possibly happen? I smiled. You never know. Or the time we were watching TV and a commercial for a divorce attorney came on. I hummed. Interesting. Maybe I should write that number down. Dan stiffened. Why the hell would you need that? I just grinned. Oh, no reason. Step 4. The final nail in the coffin. By the end of the week, Dan was officially paranoid. He started double-checking his phone every few minutes. Stopped taking late-night calls when I was in the house. Even changed his passwords again, like that was going to do him any good. And then, the real gift landed in my lap. It was a Friday night when the voice recorder picked up the conversation that would end him. Dan, pacing in his office, talking to Christina. If Kara even tries to fight this, we'll make her look like the bad guy. We'll say she cheated. She's got no proof otherwise. I froze. He wasn't just divorcing me. He was planning to ruin me. I gripped the edge of my desk, shaking with silent rage. He thought he could frame me? Humiliate me? Destroy my reputation? No. No, no, no. Dan had just signed his own death warrant. I picked up my phone and texted Brian. Me, get the paperwork ready. We're taking him down. I had played dumb long enough. Now? It was time for war. Dan thought he had me beat. He thought that when the dust settled, I'd be left scrambling for scraps, humiliated and broken. He had no idea that I'd been setting him up from the moment I overheard his little VIP lounge confession. While he was busy congratulating himself, I was playing the long game, gathering evidence, building my case, and preparing for the exact moment I'd flip the script. And that moment was now. Step 1. Strike first. I wasn't about to wait for Dan to serve me divorce papers. No, I was going to beat him to it. At precisely 9 a.m. Monday morning, my lawyer filed a lawsuit exposing everything: his financial fraud, his attempts to hide assets, and his blatant theft from our joint account. By lunchtime, Dan's world had already begun and crumbling. I knew the exact moment he found out because I was in the kitchen, casually stirring my coffee when his phone rang. He answered, his voice calm at first. Yeah, this is Dan. A pause. Then, what the hell do you mean I'm being sued? I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring every second. Dan stormed into the kitchen, phone still pressed to his ear, his face red. His eyes landed on me, and I met his gaze with the most innocent expression I could muster. Yeah, I'll call you back, he snapped into the phone before hanging up. Then, he turned to me, eyes narrowed. What the hell is this, Kara? I blinked. What's what? He slammed his phone onto the counter. You sued me. I tilted my head. Oh, that? Yeah, I figured since you were planning to leave me penniless, I should probably take some precautions. You understand, right? His jaw clenched. You can't do this. I gave him a sweet smile. I already did. Step 2. Expose everything. Dan was still scrambling to process the lawsuit when the rail bomb dropped. See, the law firm he worked for? They had ethics clauses. And financial fraud? Stealing from your spouse? Oh, that violated those clauses. I made very sure his bosses got a neatly compiled report with every shady transaction, complete with documentation from Brian's forensic audit. By the end of the day, Dan had been called into a special meeting. And by special, I mean they were firing his ass. He came home furious, his tie loosened, his face red. The moment he stepped through the door, I was already on the couch, sipping wine. They fired me, he growled. I took another sip. Oh no, I deadpanned. That's awful. His hands clenched into fists. You think this is funny? I shrugged. I think it's karma. I could see it then, the panic in his eyes. He had spent months thinking he was in control, and now? The ground was collapsing beneath him. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Step 3. Destroy his reputation. Dan cared about 2 things. His money. His image. Since I had already torched one, it was time to burn the other to the ground. I leaked our story to the media, anonymously, of course. Local news outlets picked it up first. High-powered executive faces financial fraud allegations in bitter divorce. Then, social media ran with it. By the next morning, Dan's name was trending, and not in a good way. His inbox? Flooded. His LinkedIn? Swarmed with comments. And Christina? Oh, she bailed. I knew because I caught the tail end of their screaming phone call while he paced the living room. You said you had everything under control, she shrieked. Dan gritted his teeth. I do. Oh, really? Because I just lost my job thanks to your mess, and now my bank account is under investigation. What the hell, Dan? You need to relax, he snapped. Relax? She spat. You promised me security. And now I'm tied to a criminal? He opened his mouth to argue, but the line went dead. Christina was gone. And Dan? He stood there, gripping his phone so tightly I thought he might break it. For the first time in weeks, I saw something new in his expression. Not arrogance. Not confidence. Fear. Step 4. Deliver the final blow. The divorce proceedings were fast. Dan tried to fight it, tried to argue that I was the problem, that he was the victim. But thanks to Brian's documentation, thanks to the hours of recordings proving his intent to screw me over, the judge wasn't buying it. Dan lost everything. The house? Mine. The joint savings? Mine. His investments? Frozen pending further investigation. And Dan? Dan was broke. He had to move into a tiny rental apartment across town, living off whatever scraps he had left. And me? Well, I was thriving. Step 5. Laugh in his face. A year later, I was sitting at my favorite cafe when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But curiosity got the best of me. I answered. Hello? Silence. Then, Kara. I knew that voice. I smirked. Dan. A heavy sigh. Look. I just wanted to talk. Oh, I said, sipping my latte. That's funny. Last I checked, you had nothing left to say to me. A pause. Then, softer, I miss you. I laughed. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my drink. Miss me? I snorted. Dan, you tried to ruin me. I made a mistake, he admitted. I don't know what I was thinking. I tilted my head, pretending to think. Well, I could forgive you. Or, I let the silence stretch. Or what? He asked, almost hopeful. Or I could hang up and go back to my fabulous, Dan-free life. I didn't wait for a response. I ended the call, blocked his number, and tossed my phone onto the table. Then, with a smile, I leaned back in my chair and enjoyed my coffee. Dan was nothing to me now. Just another man who learned the hard way. You should never underestimate a woman who's ready to burn your world to the ground. Dan's life didn't just fall apart. It exploded. After the lawsuit, the firing, and Christina's dramatic exit, he still thought he could recover. He thought he could land another high-paying job. He thought he could smooth-talk his way back into high society. He thought he could rebuild. He was wrong. Because the thing about burning bridges is that once they're gone, they're gone. And I made damn sure no one was throwing him a lifeline. When he lost his job, his company launched an internal investigation to assess just how deep his financial fraud ran. Brian had uncovered plenty of shady transactions, but the ones we didn't put in the lawsuit, we saved those for later. Dan tried applying elsewhere, thinking his experience and charm would be enough to land him a new position. What he didn't realize was that every hiring manager in his industry had already received an anonymous tip about his financial misdeeds. Interview after interview, he got the same polite rejections. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We're looking for someone with a different set of values. We appreciate your application, but at this time, Dan's network dried up overnight. The people who used to shake his hand and buy him drinks now barely returned his calls. And the best part? He had no idea why. One night, I got a text from a former colleague of his. Dan's been blacklisted. Every firm knows what he did. He's screwed. I smiled, deleted the message, and went back to sipping my wine. As the weeks passed, Dan's desperation grew. With no job and no steady income, the bills piled up fast. The luxurious lifestyle he had built for himself started crumbling. He sold his car first, then his watch collection, then the fancy suits he used to flaunt like armor. He moved out of his high-rise apartment and into a dingy rental on the other side of town, the kind of place he used to scoff at when we were together. And just when I thought he couldn't sink any lower, he called me. The moment I saw his name on my phone, I knew exactly what he wanted. I let it ring. Then, for the hell of it, I texted back. Dan, I'd love to help, but unfortunately, my financial situation is completely tied up in my divorce settlement. You understand? He didn't reply. But later that night, Megan sent me a *T from his now private Instagram account. A picture of him sitting in a tiny, half-furnished apartment, captioned, "Some mistakes cost more than money." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my drink. Dan had spent months thinking he was in control, that he was winning. But in the end, I took everything from him. And I did it without breaking a sweat. But his downfall wasn't over yet. A week later, Brian called me. "Did you see the news?" I frowned, putting him on speaker while I scrolled through my phone. "What news?" Dan's ex-company released the final results of their investigation. Turns out he was skimming money long before he met you. And guess what? What? They're taking legal action. I almost dropped my coffee. You're kidding. Not at all. Embezzlement, financial fraud, there's enough there for a criminal case. It's all over the business news. I opened up my laptop and searched Dan's name. Disgraced executive under investigation for financial crimes. His smug face was plastered all over the headlines. Every single article went into excruciating detail about his fall from grace. The financial fraud, the lawsuits, the complete loss of his career. I sat back, reading every word, savoring every single line. Then I saw it. A tiny note at the end of one of the articles. Sources say that Daniel Montgomery has recently filed for bankruptcy. I choked on my laughter. Dan, the man who once told me I'd be nothing without him. The man who tried to cheat me out of everything. Now, he was broke, jobless, humiliated, and it was all his own fault. A few days later, Megan and I went out for drinks. "To karma," she said, raising her glass. I smirked. "To revenge." We clinked our glasses together, the sound ringing out like a victory bell. Dan had spent years trying to control me. Dan lost everything. And me? I was just getting started. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the weight of suspicion, from the late-night doubts, from the slow-burning anxiety of knowing something was off but not having proof. I had spent so much time wrapped up in Dan's world, in his version of our marriage, that I forgot what it was like to just live for myself. So that's exactly what I did. First, I sold the house. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That place had once been my home, but now it was just a monument to a life I no longer wanted. The memories of late-night fights, of whispered phone calls, of a man planning to betray me while I slept in the next room, it wasn't worth holding on to. Instead, I bought a sleek, modern condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. It was mine, fully paid for, fully furnished, fully free of Dan. Next, I made sure my financial future was secure. Between the divorce settlement and the assets I managed to reclaim, I was set. But I didn't just want to be comfortable, I wanted to thrive. So, I worked with Brian to reinvest my money, ensuring that no matter what happened next, I would never be in a position where a man could hold finances over my head again. Then, I built something new. Dan had spent years trying to leave me with nothing. He had planned my downfall so carefully, making sure I would walk away penniless, humiliated, powerless. So, in the ultimate twist of fate, I decided to use his betrayal to empower other women instead. With Brian's help, I started a foundation, one that provided legal and financial resources for women dealing with financial abuse and manipulation in relationships. At first, it was just a small operation, me, Brian, and a few other passionate volunteers. But within months, word spread. People started donating. Lawyers and financial advisors offered their services pro bono. Women from everywhere started reaching out, sharing their stories, asking for help. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything I had been through actually meant something. One night, about a year after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in my condo, drinking a glass of wine, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Hello? Silence. Then, Kara. I knew that voice. I smiled. Dan. A heavy sigh. I wanted to talk. I swirled my wine in my glass, leaning back into my couch. Oh, I miss you. I let out a sharp laugh. You miss me? I do, he insisted, his voice softer now. I made mistakes, Kara. I was selfish and Stop, I cut him off. Just stop. He went quiet. You don't miss me, Dan, I said calmly. You miss who I used to be. You miss the woman who stood by you while you made mistake after mistake. You miss the wife who trusted you, who loved you. I took a sip of my wine, savoring the taste. That woman? She's gone. Kara. I hope you figure your life out, I said, my tone even. Really, I do. But I'm not your backup plan. And I sure as hell am not your safety net. He exhaled sharply. I don't know what to do anymore. For the briefest moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered everything. I remembered the way he had whispered in the VIP lounge, planning my destruction. I remembered the financial fraud, the stolen money, the smug satisfaction on his face when he thought he had outsmarted me. I remembered the sheer glee in Christina's voice when she said, once she's out of the way, we can finally be together. And just like that, any trace of pity disappeared. That's not my problem, Dan, I said simply. And then, before he could say another word, I hung up, blocked his number,